Hello everybody, this is Ukraine Life with Lyudmila Nemyra, and the sponsor of my channel is Trademark Hetman. I have got a lot of requests to invite Alexey Arestovych to our channel again, and that's what we're doing. Haven't seen you for a long time, Alexey. Hello. Indeed, glad to be back with you. Alright, Alexey, what do I want to say? Since we have not talked for a while, I do want us to look at everything from a global point of view in the world. I think we were rather successful in doing that before. So if you allow me, let's start with the overall situation on the Ukrainian front. How do you see it? And then we'll try to go from there. Alright, fairly recently, Russian army was pressing Ukraine armed forces at about 7 different locations on the front. Their logic was to make sure we exert our reserves and capabilities, and we would not have enough ability to aggregate more. They were doing it by strengthening one location, then switching to another, then switching to the third. Exactly what we were doing in summer. That was one of our strongest tactical techniques when we were shifting our effort from one area of the front to another. They were doing a very similar thing to us. But behind all this vinaigrette, there was a definite logic. You could see where they are going. They're going to Slavyansk, Kramatorsk and Izyum, because they have political framework of this conflict that goes back to adopting back in October of 2022, Zaporozhye, Lugansk and Donetsk and Crimea into the Russian constitution as Russian territories. So they cannot leave these territories occupied by damned Ukrainians. They have to take them, right? So Zaporozhye is more difficult to realize. Supply chain, it's steppe terrain, very strained railroad supply. Crimean bridge is difficult to use right now, so it's not an easy task. But Donetsk and Lugansk, unlike Zaporozhye, is infrastructure that was being built since 2014. It has direct access to Russian territory where supplies are coming from. So their first and primary task is capture of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. Why Donetsk has a more emphasis than Lugansk? Because if they succeed in capturing Donetsk region, then Lugansk front gets additional protrusion underneath it. So Russians would be sort of behind the backs of Zaporozhye front and behind the backs of Lugansk front. And those two would lose their stability. So that's why they're pressing on Donetsk region. To cover that, they throw into the media things like attack on Kiev again, destroying and attacking Kharkov again. But that's just to withdraw the attention from Donetsk region. Out of the reserves they're currently building, at best, they would be able to get something aggregated by the end of summer. This is the best scenario. And they're preparing next offensive to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. For that, they need to take Chasiv Yar and Konstantinovka before that. A group of very difficult tasks that is very hard for them to take even now. And one needs to separate Russian-owned propaganda, where they're saying that they take one settlement every day. That's blatant lies and tearful to watch. Second is our Ukrainian tears aimed at the West, saying that we are running short, we need more shells, please provide, please help us. And the third is Western scary analytics that if we do not give them 800 billion in help, Ukraine will collapse. Everything is not so. All right, so if everything is different, Alexey, how is it? So Russian army is conducting its offensive at the peak of its strain. These well-known now meet storms that they try to conduct with destruction, a ton of their tanks, a lot of their personnel. In that style, one cannot fight if they do have these tasks that we outlined earlier. You just lose too many resources getting there. So right now, for example, at Chasiv Yar, they're throwing 2 paratroopers divisions, the best they have. And the rest of the infantry is just treated like meat, without much training, without education. According to recent interrogations of drivers, of the vehicle drivers, tank drivers, their training was comprised by, they were being put in already started tank. They were told to drive 15 yards forward, 10 yards back, and that's their training. So nobody really is spending much time preparing them. Very Russian style of war, just dumping tons of meat on us. And as for using that style to take Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Donetsk, Konstantinovka, one would say it's impossible unless they find another 150,000 to throw at this front, exclusively just that segment, and we don't see that on their side. They don't have this capacity yet. As for shells, we don't have a parity with the Russian Federation. We have maybe one for their 6, but that is enough to hold and defend our positions. Even President acknowledged that we have enough shells for defense, we don't have enough for counteroffensive actions. So it is generally okay to hold them, even though it's scarce. And as for scaring the West, it's always good to scare them a bit because they're slow in making decisions. And by the way, Europe has already made enough decisions. I guess they realized the dangers of Putin's rising, and they're already ramping up their production and helping Ukraine more. As for the United States, the more often the titles of their articles are scariest, the more statements are made by congressmen, the better it is, because it's into that whole bucket to make sure they actually start helping us again. It does, however, grow into some bogus rumors from Kiev and Ukraine that in summer Russia will be taking Kiev. Alexey, I'm in Kiev, I'm not packing anything. Right? I'm not getting ready to evacuate. Exactly. My whole family is in Kiev too. Don't be afraid. Russia doesn't have enough effort to do that. There is another vector, the problem with air defense missiles or missile defense systems. Here, President made a statement that we have a deficit of this shells, of these resources to counter Russian attacks. And this is indeed a problem. Russia is trying to use that. Russia is trying to put additional pressure on us. But if you keep tracing the numbers of Shahids and cruise missiles and ballistics being shot down, we do have a system that works. One can say that we generally are shooting them at a certain same percentage rate. Another myth that Kiev is mostly protected and the other towns are not in Ukraine. Not so. Kiev is only covered by about 30% of what we have. The rest is spread throughout the country and different other places where there is a serious risk of Russian hits. And in order to cover the whole Ukraine, President said we need 25 complexes of Patriot systems, and I think we need at least 12. What Russia is doing now, they are trying to hit the main energy transmission stations and coal generation stations. So we don't have really a generation issue. We have nuclear power plants that they're not attacking. We're also connected to European networks. But they're trying to isolate different branches of our electric systems. So they're trying to make sure we cannot supply the electricity we generate everywhere we need to. So if you take a step back, remember how we were getting ready to the big counteroffensive and they were digging into the ground? Today, it's an absolutely mirror situation. They're promising another counteroffensive and we're trying to fortify our positions. So after we repel this attack, and I have no doubts that we will, both sides will be sitting at the maps thinking, well, we cannot attack and we cannot advance. What are we going to do in this situation? Why do you have no concerns that we will repel their attack rather successfully? I think we all hope for that here in Ukraine, but what arguments can we talk about? Well, first, Lyudmila, they are failing to create a proper group that will be as a battering ram to break through our front line. They are really poor fighters. They have some achievements like UAVs, like radio interference systems, like gliding bombs, but their land troops are fighting really horribly, very poorly. The second aspect is that we feel ourselves rather comfortable in defense, and even with our FPV drones and other drone messages and methods, we compensate for the lack of artillery. Not completely, but at least something. Third, we have serious doubts about their ability to aggregate somewhat meaningful reserves, like the levels of brigade, divisions, army corps. Why? You mean even with the partial mobilization that they're doing now? Right, because you can draft enough people to fill the depleted units that already are at the front, to backfill them, but to create new elements of the army from zero, I think even civilians already know that it's a very difficult work to create a 20,000 army from zero, officers, soldiers, generals, equipment, blood, medicine, food, transport. They're trying to do that. But out of the strategic reserves aggregated so far, actually not even aggregated, just in the plans. They have 3 divisions planned by the end of August. That's definitely not enough to attack Kramatorsk or Kupiansk or Slavyansk. And the third is that we also started to dig in. We started finally building our fortification lines that aid our military to keep the front line, to hold, and that help to prevent more losses. So just like back in last summer, when we were announcing our counteroffensives, they were digging in. They're like idiots. Okay, we made this mistake first time. You guys are repeating the exact same mistake that we did last time. So we're digging and they're running behind in terms of forming their new counteroffensive. This is, by the way, one of the reasons why now they're trying to push so hard with what they have, waste a ton of equipment and personnel. Oh, you mean they just don't let us dig in? Exactly. Because they try to get to the areas that will be more favorable for them to start their counteroffensive later. But I don't think they will succeed in this. So I'm reservedly optimistic on this. Alexey, remember we tried to connect the war of Russia with Ukraine to some other hotspots in the world. And I do want to remember about Israel in this case, because I think the war they have is very exemplary. Yesterday I talked with David Gendelman. We had a very frank conversation about what is going on there in reality. And he said a very interesting phrase. For now, we have not denounced our allied relationships with the United States. Situation is difficult but controllable. But even just the statement, the formulation of this phrase sounds very strange for Ukrainian ear, because we're thinking that Israel and the United States, their relations are just fine. So do you think there is some connection with what's going on with Ukraine? Because I think it has some overall commonality. All right, let's start this way. Israel and the United States had things going pretty bad between them up until the early 70s, up until 73. And those years before that were probably the most difficult part of Israel's existence. I would remind in 1956, Suez Canal crisis, Soviet Union and United States jointly were acting against Israel and UK up with the threats of using arms. And in 73, United States finally came and helped Israel a bit, partially. And their idea was to take over Egypt from the sphere of influence of Soviet Union. And in doing so, and in exerting their influence now on Suez Canal, they were also striking out the UK from that area. They were removing Soviet and British influence from the Suez Canal, and they also forced Israel on one side to the peace agreement, and on the other side they were enforcing Egypt to strike peace accords. And this is probably a trademark of the United States. They always think only about the United States. Since 1973, there were different things. They actually even sank American intel vessel, the Israel aviation did, and then apologized. So since 73, Israel is in what we call in English a frenemy situation with the United States, a friend and an enemy in one package. The way that the United States is twisting Israel's arms, you don't even see anywhere else. You know, Soviet propaganda and Russian propaganda are saying that the US is the best friend of Israel. Well, there is a ton of examples where being an ally of the United States is basically a history of your arms getting twisted mercilessly. Just like now, Biden called on Israel to withdraw troops. Netanyahu had to withdraw one brigade, and there's only one brigade left in Gaza, and they're not even talking now about the future offensive towards Rafah, where the headquarters of Hamas are, where more hostages are. So operation is not done with half a year of effort and very puny completion of it. So whom can Israel thank for that? The United States, of course. So 2 decisions about hitting Xir headquarters in Syria. They did not hit any embassy. They were hitting the building where the Iranian generals were located, planning active operations. In the second event, they hit on the humanitarian convoy by mistake, and the whole campaign to stop Israel got more fuel. And in this regard, Israel was never shy to threaten to denounce allied relations. They threatened quite a few times to stop working with the United States and refuse taking $9 billion of annual help from US. Why? Because small Israel feels themselves much more stable than we do in Ukraine, because they provide at least half of their military equipment by themselves, and the rest is spread also not only from the United States, but from other countries as well. So that's exactly what I'm saying about Ukraine. Understandably, we cannot provide us for ourselves 100% in the fight against Russia. Even Soviet Union, which Stalin was building as autarkia, would still need Lend-Lease in order to successfully resist Hitler's invasion. So if we at least were sure that we can provide 50% of our resources, military capabilities, then we would have more independence. I think this is the main lesson we can learn from Israel. Obviously, we cannot carry out 100% of this war and perhaps the next war with Russia, but at least 50% somewhere in Carpathy Mountains. Can we produce that? Sure can. Why aren't we? It's like in the Ukrainian proverb, why are you so dumb? Because we're so poor. Why are you so poor? Because we're so dumb. I hope we learned that lesson. So a small lesson from Israel and United States relations. Israel comes back and says, you know what, if you'll continue that pressure, we'll denounce our relations. And big Ukraine is standing there with a stretched hand saying, give us a few billions because otherwise we'll fail and be destroyed. It kind of offends me as a Ukrainian. I would want to change that story. I want us to be truly independent. As David says, whom you had interview with, the only lesson you can learn, derive from that school, from that rough school of war with Russia, is that if you're gone, the world will cry for maybe 2 days and they'll forget about you after. Alexey, at the beginning of war, General Alevy was talking about Iran and Syria. He said also an interesting thing. He said that Israeli army needs to become not only stronger, but bigger. And he started talking and touched upon the subject of the size of the army. And yesterday, David was also in our interview saying that I've been talking about 20 years that our army needs to stop being small. So that's an interesting aspect. Does it imply that Israel, that is used to live in a certain paradigm, it starts to think that things need to change? The army needs to change, it needs to become bigger. Is it a shadow of everybody thinking what's going on now? NATO is considering growth. Even Israel is starting to review and starts to think about a bigger army. Is it big reforms or what? Where is it coming from? Right, in Israel there is a total change of paradigm happening now. For over 20 years they had the paradigm dominating that they need a small, smart, compact army. And this was a joint disease that ravaged throughout Europe and everybody. When they saw missiles flying targetedly in the open window, they said, wow. And then all these military, the whole generation for over 30 years now, who are growing with the influence of social media. Here in Ukraine, we have correspondents and bloggers growing up, different military figures in their social media. Do you know how the old military school calls that? A boutique army, right? Those pretty-looking military with fancily painted faces, proper-looking face, very fashionably-looking dress, jet pilots in some high-tech gear and cool-looking sunglasses. So all that is crashing apart. Now the biggest war in Europe, the biggest since 1945 in Europe, it revealed again that the ones who were right were not the boutique officers who made their career based on social media and getting additional authority in the societal media, but it's the old good classics, those people who learned Sun Tzu, Eisenhower, Guderian. The God is again on the side of big battalions. Again? Yes, it is. It always was. It's just that everybody had a weird spell for 30 years thinking that boutique things may help much better. And me and David, we know each other for about 25 years now, I think. So we've been giggling all the time, observing what's going on with the military in the world. And now we can laugh at full voice, seeing what's going on. This is all mythology, that Israel was winning over Arabs because of their wits, of the cunning and the training. This is all fakery. Not so. Israel was winning all the time because they created a unique mobilization system that allowed them to bring more troops to the front than Arabs did at any time. This is their main achievement. Their army was always bigger than Arab army on a certain direction. The only drawback was that they needed to be very effective and fast on that direction because their economy did not allow to function without 80% being drafted into the military. So they had to be real fast in their war actions. But that was their advantage. The number was always the advantage. And after that, there was cunning, wits, and all the equipment and everything. That's what I keep saying, that 1,000 T-55s is way better than 200 of modern Abrams tanks at the front of 1,300 kilometers long. Now, imagine West. It was all formed, all the recent forces, they're formed in the concept of a boutique war. When they can send a missile for 1,000 kilometers up the butt of the Iranian general, and this is going to be so fantastic. But pay attention that despite of all these boutique talks, US Army is still 2 million people with the reserve. Add on to that, right? 2 million, really? Yes, it is. Now, whom are they holding this army against? Because immediate neighbors, there's what? They have evil Canada and treacherous Mexico. So all the conversation about smart warfare, F-35s, robot fighting, robo warfare, those people who like to listen to all that in the social media, in the TV shows, this is all for the birds. Look at the army of US, look at the army of Turkey. Turkey, by the way, is building their jet fighter of the 6th generation, but still keep the biggest land army in the region, up to 1 million if you calculate all of them, because the God is still on the side of big battalions, and there is no way you can get them quickly, well-trained, if you don't have them. Look, at the beginning of this war, Russian invasion group was about 300,000, right, together with Rosguard, armies of Donetsk and Lugansk, so-called republics. They bumped into our mobilized army and failed because they couldn't, the numbers they had was not enough. They just failed utterly. But when they aggregated more people and they threw them in the front, they just plugged the holes with their meat, and that's when our counteroffensive stalled. And when they grew it to 600,000, we started having serious issues on the front. Not because they have FPV drones too, but because they have a lot of meat, a lot of force on the ground. And we in Ukraine are failing to take mobilization, to adopt mobilization bill. We're already late by 4 months at least. A lot of parts of the front are hanging by a thread because we don't have enough people. This is the price of populism. Old coaches at the strategy department, those who were learned from those who actually fought in the Second World War, and they fought themselves in Mozambique and Ethiopia and other places and other hotspots, they were telling us that the moment you start hearing that people talk about new technical capabilities, that's a sign that their organizational part of the structure sucks. It's falling apart. And that's what we hear now, right? All these conversations about radio electronic interference, new technological breakthroughs to break the stalemate, it indicates that we do not have enough organizational efficiency to train the troops and to use the means we have to overcome strategic stalemate. And I would remind our listeners that in the First World War, the stalemate was overcome not by tanks initially. Tanks came later, and tanks with aviation appeared later with radio and other communication and joint force operations, but with the storm groups that were organized from the same soldiers, with same machine guns, same rifles, without any radio, but with coordination and organization. That's what Germany did. So, technological element, of course, is important, but it's only maybe a fifth of what's happening at the front. The numbers are way more important, and level of organization is super important. When you lack both, no smart army, no drones or other technical measures will be able to resolve it. And the whole NATO and other countries of the world, sorry, Lyudmila, let me finish here, they're trying to fix that logic. They do not imply getting rid of AI and smart equipment, smart bombs and all that technology, but it means that they still need a big army that has a lot of cheap methods of fighting. Cheaper tanks, cheaper rifles, cheaper machine guns. That army will be solving main brunt of the tasks. And on the top, of course, there'll be a small layer with pretty glasses and high-tech AI equipment that will be polishing it off. Does it mean, Alexey, that the world will be going back to the production of conventional arms and getting ready to large-scale warfare like that was done at the initial Cold War arms race? And ultimately, they'll be restarting all those big factories that were building tanks, howitzers, millions of artillery shells. Is it another round of that big war preparations? And that would imply the whole rebuilding of NATO armies as well. Indeed, the world is going back to that. And the amount of investments into the military sector and military equipment is mind-boggling. I think what we'll see in the near future, numbers in EU, they'll be very impressive for everybody. They finally figured it out and they're starting to invest. The West had a severe problem, deficiency exposed when they realized that North Korea, being under sanctions, still manages to produce 5 times more artillery shells than the whole NATO bloc. So the whole message about not having any big conventional warfare happening anytime soon, there'll be just partisan small conflicts here and there, that led to the whole NATO bloc being producing very smart weapons, or in a very limited capacity that would last only for maybe 2 weeks. But what happens if the war lasts longer than 2 weeks? And the second aspect was that market came to the military industry. While Le Cornu in France, their Minister of Defense, starts to talk about nationalizing military production. Do you know that the West, since the summer of 22, after the first couple of Rammsteins, decided to rebuild their military capacity and military industry to aid Ukraine, and failed to do that? Again, because of the laws of the market, because they were dumping tens of billions of dollars in it, but it only led to the price growth from 1,600 155mm artillery shell made in America. In about 2 years, the price of this shell grew to 8,400. For one simple reason: what the market is. The moment you force your production force to work overnight, to work weekends, unions come in and say that, well, okay, this is going to cost you more because they work at night, more insurance, more additional payments, and the cost of the production rises. And you can only produce maybe 10 to 20% more. So the price goes disproportionately higher. So the West have not at large found solution to that. Russia is following what America did during the Second World War. The logic is that the government gives credit to the private companies to produce. Private companies produce and give the product and get the money back and pay back on the credit. The production grows, the people's income grows in this industry, but the only key element is to stop the export of these money from the country. So the money doesn't run away, and it somewhat holds inflation. Europeans have figured what to do, and now, especially French, they're acting as leads in this regard. And they're increasing their production capacities, aiming at 26 and 27 to be full-on scale production. This will be like the old-time France when they'll be talking about millions of shells, etc. It was not an easy task for them. They even brought up some of the retirees from their retirement to continue teaching and producing more, but they're investing into this seriously. After having discovered with shock that so-called axis of evil produces about 7 million artillery shells per year, and all high-tech, super-technological NATO is barely scraping 1 million. So they are rebuilding their armies, they're rebuilding their production base. You see a lot more draft is happening in different countries. In Holland, they're growing their military. In Poland, they're growing the army. Germany is increasing theirs, except America. America has their own issues. And Israel, of course, right. Alexey, you did mention that United States have an army of 2 million, so let's get back to them a little later. But what you were saying now, do I understand it right, that what the world is trying to do is to accept the rules of the game prompted by Russia? Huge army with conventional classic arms. What about those asymmetric warfare that they've been talking about for a while? How to win that game, how to win over Russia, because if you continue duking it out wall against the wall, it'll be similar to the First World War, Second World War. Where is the progress then? How do you see that? Well, look, first of all, NATO has a total advantage. Here's an example for you. When 20 Ukrainian missiles, they are French and British, but they're used by Ukraine, fly into Crimea, where Russia keeps the strongest air defense group in Russia, as they consider Crimea to be part of Russia. We still managed to hit their headquarters, their command HQ, the submarines, the docks, the vessels. And then the smarter part of their society starts to ask questions. So wait, Ukrainians launched 20 missiles, and that's the damage. What will happen if they launch 500? In the first volley, if NATO gathers together, they can launch 11,000 Tomahawks. That would imply that Russian economy and military will be in tatters as a result of it. Russian leadership is aware of that. Not Solovyov and those people who are talking at his shows, except for a couple maybe smarter experts. Not the mad people convinced by propaganda. They understand that they're not on par with NATO. That's why they're pumping up their bluff and they're fighting in the secondary warfare areas, like Wagner kicked out France from Africa. People are laughing, saying, well, look, France has lost Africa. They gave up on Africa for political reasons, because no country can afford a picture, a visual view where white soldiers are killing black soldiers. But When the whites are killing whites, French can afford that. That's Macron has no qualms about bringing his troops to Ukraine, and they can talk about that. But in Africa, there are Americans still working. Our intel groups are working in Africa. We're destroying that same Wagner mercenary corps rather successfully. That tells that those hotspots have not disappeared. There are still important secondary zones of use of warfare. That's where asymmetric warfare can still be happening. Also, we can talk about cognitive warfare. What is it, Alexey? So the goal of cognitive warfare is not so much to destroy the enemy, but to drive the civilians mad in the country. That's what's being used rather successfully. Russia is trying to do that against Ukraine, and very often rather successfully. They cannot deal with our army on the front, but they are throwing in a lot of information fakes in our media sphere, and our society at large very often goes apeshit when they hear certain things. And cognitive warfare is a serious element. Brits and Americans are also betting a lot on that. Britain, by the way, is not increasing the size of their army. It's only about 70,000 troops. It's about nothing. Avdiivka was taken by 120,000 troops on the Russian side. And British army is the smallest and the saddest in Europe. Now, the new feature that they're talking about in this cognitive warfare is space operations. So eventually, in 10 to 15 years, there'll be some military presence there too, but right now they're using it as a psychological element. And I think we're back in the big masses, in the big armies territory. So whoever learns how to create them and how to operate them successfully will be in the winning side. Alexey, yesterday, even a little before that, in the joint article by Ministers of Foreign Affairs of France and Britain, they remembered about Entente Union and also about the nuclear weapons that both countries have. And Macron mentioned that, of course, Russia is threatening everybody with nukes. We also have nukes. So this one was another statement that, hey, we both are nuclear countries. So nuclear weapons as an additional factor in this big warfare, does it still play a role or it disappears somewhere? Is it still somewhat of a deterrent factor, or what is with it in this situation? Well, look, Lyudmila, nukes is a very niche story. Not a single country that has nukes successfully managed to avoid wars or even being attacked. Simplest example is Falkland Islands in the 1982 war. Britain has nukes. It's one of the strongest NATO members. Argentina attacked them in the Falklands, and Britain had to go there and carry out that conflict. And nobody hit Argentina with the nukes, right? Same thing with Israel. They supposedly have nukes, but they're still getting attacked by proxy fighters of Iran, by guys in slippers with machine guns. Russia has nukes, and Chechens and the others, and Ukrainians for now, are hitting Russia left and right. So nukes is only a good tool for a scenario, to prevent a scenario of an utter total defeat. And 9 out of 10 wars will never get to that scenario. Even the doctrine that they have in Russia, the doctrine for use of nukes, only states that they can be used when they're under nuclear threat or when Russia is under risk of total destruction to avoid historic defeat and all the fallout from that. That's how it was. Now the threshold is lowered significantly. Russians did that with their nuclear blackmail. Chinese are very much against it. Why they're against it? Because their strategy is soft wars, equipped with additional, of course, military arm, financial pressure, but they don't want to be involved in these military operations before they are ready, especially with the threat of use of nukes in it. That's why they don't want to have these discussions at all, categorically. But Russia, with Medvedev's Twitter, had posed the problem up front, in front of the whole world, that they will be using it, and they've been screaming at the whole world about this possibility. That's why I was talking that Russia is going for the second Caribbean crisis. The last interview before so-called elections, Putin did mention that they're going to escalate. And the scenario was to create another hotspot, like Baltic countries, try to call upon NATO to face Russia directly. They were hoping that Europe, abandoned by Trump, will not be ready to face Russia, to fight Russia. And if they wouldn't be afraid of that, then Russia would threaten them with nukes. But Europe had discovered that, indeed, Trump is threatening to pull out of NATO. and then Putin is threatening Europe. Then Europe decided that they are not keen about leaving their interests and that they will actually stay and fight, including nukes if necessary. And they're reviving the cordial agreement between France and Britain and saying up in the open to Putin back that, hey, if you get it to nukes, there will be nukes. So according to my conversations here and all the data in the open field, they are saying that they're ready for that. And they have broken Putin's plan this way. They broke it in the highest sense. Sun Tzu has the scale of military art, and the highest achievement he talks about is breaking enemy's plans without shooting, without killing any soldier. And the lowest is storming the fortresses. So Russia is storming the fortresses, but French and British, they broke the plan that Putin carried out in his mind for the second Caribbean crisis without firing a single shot. He might still use it at some point, but, not in the same fashion as they were hoping, with the same outcome as they were hoping to get before. Because Europe already answered that, if you'll blackmail us, we'll have our own guns. Alexey, let's go back to other hot fires, hotspots around the planet. Do you think a second option is possible around Ukraine? And there is Moldova, there are Baltic countries. We can probably remember Iran as well, because if Iran, as it is expected, on Israel, then perhaps Iran may respond to Israel on those explosions in Damascus. Then the situation changes not only for the Middle East, but for other areas as well, for the South Caucasus, for Ukraine. What do you think? In the near future, do you see the happening and the opening of the second hotspot? Well, Lyudmila, we have a litmus test, so-called President of Belarus, Lukashenko. Look at his recent statement. More mobilization efforts, additional training exercises for Belarus army, more punishment for the draft dodgers. What is that about? That's either real preparedness or distraction. Sometimes it's a mix of both, because one of the ways to deceive somebody is just to tell them the truth. What can we say? We can say that after Sweden and Finland joined NATO, Baltic Sea is closed for Russia. So all their efforts for 300 years of acquiring Baltic area were annulled. Obviously, they will try to do something about it. And most vulnerable are the Baltic countries, where, for example, they have a lot of Russian-speaking population that is very loyal to Russia. We also have a lot of Russian-speaking population in Ukraine, but they're not loyal to Russia. So the city of Narva, 96% of them are Russian-speaking. And there are quite a few that are fans of Putin. Imagine them raising a flag of Narva People's Republic. And what does Estonia do? Do they have to attack a city where 96% are Russians? Especially if Russia puts its own military maybe 300 yards away from the border. And this is how they are not so much going to acquire Estonia, but to start a political crisis in NATO, to outline that NATO cannot make a political decision after such a hybrid attack. And if it doesn't work, then they can threaten a real warfare, a hotspot, and then if that doesn't work, they can escalate to use of nukes. And for this, the whole Baltic area from Suwalki region to Narva to Daugavpils, where there is enough Russian-speaking population, and Vilnius is only 20-minute ride from Belarus border. So Russia will not be able to attack that area without Belarus. That's why Lukashenko is huffing and puffing and trying to prepare his army as well. Another option would be Moldova, but it's more difficult to get there. They are facing new elections soon, in February of next year, but sometime between November and February. They will have a referendum about joining EU. A lot of leaders are saying there in Transnistria that they will never acknowledge that. They're threatening some political action, but they have a lot of Romanian passports in there, in Moldova. And Romania already has 6,000 armored vehicles and 36 Patriot systems that fully control Moldova airspace. 36? Indeed, 36, Lyudmila. And more troops are getting there. American, French, British. French are looking pretty close after Romania. So, according to the plans, they might have 150,000 troops close to that area in a year and a half. And the security of Black Sea is a separate topic that deserves another discussion. So Russians can try to create some provocations internally and create internal crisis, but I think Moldova, with the help of Romania, will be able to figure it out. So less concerned about that. Another area would be Western Balkans. So the statement by recent president of Serbia, let me show you the plans of our enemies. Again, could be a hotspot, but there are a lot of NATO things around it. So Baltic is probably the most vulnerable spot. Another place is Middle East. If Iran starts something there could be another hot collision. There could be, I don't see a big war probability there. I don't see that happening, but I cannot exclude exchange of missiles, UAVs, and some shelling of the cities. But there's a big difference between naval and missile warfare versus a huge land warfare. Here I would even say that that whole motion is a Third World War sprinkled or scattered. So it's not a coalition and a single front line. It's different hotspots here and there. This was the idea and stratagem of General Soleimani, who was taken out by America. They were thinking that they can overcome the power of the United States by creating more crises, so that if America can deal with one or two, they would not be able to deal with 4 or 5 or 7, because the United States had a doctrine of being able to fight 2 conventional warfare actions in different parts of the world. So now after Afghanistan, they officially declared that they're limiting that to 1. Right, exactly. So that's a famous story that I did talk about. Remember when America had some stockpile of shells that were initially placed in Israel and Jordan, and they started moving them to Ukraine. That was the time of the fight for Bakhmut, and that was the time when the operation in Gaza started. And Israelis and Ukrainians were quarreling for 2 weeks, figuring out who gets these 50,000 artillery shells. 50,000 is what Russia shoots at us during a week. And that's what I was showing as the main threat, why the West is not ready for this war. They looked at that, they understood it, and now they're treating it a bit differently. So they're trying to stockpile more munitions and create new capabilities. But one should need to remember that the West has a huge pre-nuclear option to answer. If they use Tomahawks, then Iran or Russia or China, whoever gets hit by that, might in case of war. But the problem is fighting a conventional warfare on the ground. So the number of tanks, artillery shells, troops. But even here they made their decisions. Now they're carrying out the biggest training exercise since the Second World War. They're moving a lot of troops to the eastern border of NATO, and I'm going to say right now that a bunch of them, probably half of that amount, will stay there. It'll probably be about 150,000 men. It is a very serious story because well-prepared and well-stocked professional army is a super factor that one needs to consider. So the training will continue till the end of May, Alexey? No, these will last till the end of August. And there are different elements that will be trained. And they will be covering elections of EU, the European Parliament, the NATO summit. This is all happening with the backdrop of those political events. And this is not just a demonstration, this is real readiness. So let's say that the West is now extremely quickly equalizing their capabilities with their potential enemies. Because China, Russia, and Iran, they had an advantage because they had a lot of infantry that are ready to die in the close fights. So there was a big asymmetry in airfield, in airspace, in naval space. The West was prevailing, but on the ground, the West was not as strong. And the peculiar difference here is that neither China, nor Iran, nor Russia can quickly catch up with the West in terms of missiles or naval advantage. That's billions of money invested and decades of work. But the West can easily catch up on the ground. It's much easier for the West to catch up on the ground with all these countries. And they're quickly eroding that disparity that existed there up until this year. So here Ukraine also is playing a key role, having destroyed Russian professional army without allowing Russian professional army to actualize, because Russian officers, younger commanding officers also, they're dying before they can actually transfer their knowledge and establish a better system. Additionally, you saw that India recently refused to buy Russian oil, and Chinese banks refused to conduct financial operations with Russia. So the West also has a very strong economic influence. And that BRICS, that was initially growing on the anti-colonial rhetoric, at the moment when the West made an angry face and stomped its foot, they withdrew and said, okay, well, we're not actively participating. If Russia wants to be a battering ram, good luck, but we'll stay aside and see. If Russia succeeds in destroying the West, then we'll come over and say, yes, now it's our turn. But if Russia fails, then we'll help you carry that mad dog to the slaughterhouse, and then we can celebrate and live together peacefully. So one cannot say that BRICS is a unified alliance against the West. They're very peculiar in what they do and how they do it. Of course, they try to help Russia by circumnavigating sanctions, but Russia is indeed a very dumb pit bull in this situation. They cannot fulfill the main tasks on the front. They're not so successful in scaring the West, and the West is awakening. I still am considering that awakening to be an act of God. Europe had awoken. I was not believing that is impossible. I was hoping more for the United States, but Europe surprised me. And Macron became a historic figure basically overnight. That's what the weight of timely made decision can do to you. So you did say that Europe had awoken, but that America is still not scared enough with the possible outcome of this conflict. Why do you say so? They do have 2 million people in their armed forces. They're awakening in some fashion, right? In America, Lyudmila, they have another movie coming out, which is called Civil War. And there is a fantastic episode I keep talking about when some red-haired improvised territorial defenseman is asking a family trying to cross the block post, he's asking, what kind of Americans are you? Right? And then there is another little snippet where he basically puts a gun to the head and is scrolling through the social media and the Twitter of that family. So in America, one can say there is a direct civil warfare already happening. It's ideological for now. Will it get to the hot phase? Probably not. I don't see F-35s fighting in the skies for one side or another. But the ideological strain is really hot white. For Republicans and conservatives who are Protestants, who are in a good sense of this word, fanatics in this way, for them it is a religious warfare. What is a religious warfare? It is a complete non-sympathy to your opponent. And I think that if you anonymously ask Republicans if they're ready to strike those Sodom and Gomorrah's strongholds of Democrats, they would probably answer that yes, if that gets to that. Just imagine that all the values that they hold dear, family, children, work, everything described in Bible and testaments, the other side is going against. All these chemical castrations, gender changes with children, taking rights away from parents and the families. So for them, this is madness. And this is why they're fighting so hard against it. That's why Trump is so popular, because Democrats only hold some of the bigger cities, and the rest of America is rather Republican or even Trumplican. Trump and his party are actually on the margins of Republican Party. Traditionally, Republican Party was dominated by conservatives and neoconservatives. So even there, he was on the margins. But he's got such a huge support because of his position. How did DeSantis repaint Florida? Through the reform of education. A typical story in a democratic state, in democratic schools, when parents bring a child to school, they're being told to step aside, and the school director is telling the kids that, listen, these people may tell you if you're a boy or a girl, but you have freedom to choose who you are. And if they'll be harming your rights and you'll not like how they behave towards you, we can call upon police and we'll probably take you to Child Protective Services from them. And that's where we get 7-year-olds bullying their parents about who they are and how they should behave. The red America, Trump-supporting America, just goes mad looking at that. They're eager to strangle these guys with these experiments on children. And how they understand what's happening in Europe and Ukraine. That's how they see it. Let's go on that. They understand that Democrats are in power because of the global institutions. Huge budgets from the income of the United States are being washed out in favor of global institutions. That's how global elites grow. That's how Democrats get their influence. And a very simple thought, in order to destroy democratic influence and win back America from them, one needs to destroy their globalist structures. And there bring Afghanistan as an example. For 21 years, you've been spending $2 billion a day, and they cannot give 60 to Ukraine right now. That's only 30 days of Afghanistan's campaign. during the last 20 years. And you know that Afghanistan practically did not see that money. This all was earned by the structures affiliated with this campaign. The cleaning lady in Bagram Air Base was being paid $8,000 a month. And what do you do cleaning there in the gym, right? You swipe the floor, maybe for some risks or the danger. That's how you get money. But the money were mad there. And they were all going where? Mostly, right, to the Democrats' establishments. So that's what they're saying to the population. The Trump party, that's what they're saying. Democrats are spending money, taking it from America, spending it for something, presumably out in the outer world, and yet most of it actually stays in your pockets. They're also saying that they're bringing all these illegals across the southern border to repaint the red states into their democratic blue color, because in many states there are different schemes being used to give vote to these people. In some states, even green cards can vote. In other states, they're just doing other shenanigans. So all that at the expense of American people, against American people. So that's what the Trump fraction of Republican Party is saying, that, guys, what are you doing? What the heck? And having looked around here, I think they're quite right. So on this historic stage, I'm actually supportive of Trump, because he's the only person who can, the only political figure who has a chance of breaking it. And what about the aid to Ukraine from Republicans? Well, Lyudmila, Republicans are not against aid to Ukraine. After the 9th, they will be bringing their own bill to the Congress to help Ukraine. And Biden and current administration, they conjoined projects of help to Taiwan, Israel, and Ukraine into one package, as Republicans accuse them, to make more money and to earn better dollars for their pockets. Republicans are saying that you're not trying to help Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. You're just trying to make more money on this project. That's what they tell Biden administration. So Ukraine has two difficult things going against it. First of all, they perceive Ukraine and Ukrainian politics as one of the favorite toys of the globalist Democrats. Why? Right? When you talk to them about aid, when they see you and they understand you're from Ukraine, they want to hug you and ask questions about how's your family doing, how's life. Russian missiles, damn Putin, etc. will never abandon you. And then you ask them a question, so why are you not voting for this? I'm not asking these questions, I already figured that out, but many people do have this question, right? So their answer is they are not voting to not let globalists earn money again. And when you ask them why you so against Ukraine, they would often retort with, well, look, who had a US transgender person as the head of territorial defense? He was removed later, but that was an interesting move, right? Who adopted Istanbul Declaration, right? That's that anti-religious project of washing away the family values and the things they keep dear. If you think that we don't see that, guys, we do see that. Who is attacking the Moscow patriarchy in Ukraine? Yesterday, one of the American congressmen made a statement that Ukraine is attacking church and Russia is defending that church. Talking about Russian Moscow patriarchy, right? That one has 3 million subscribers on her socials. Or one of the key statements by one of the Republicans, she's African-American, she's very well-known, also opinion leader. One of her videos, we are helping pure evil, and there she outlines exactly these things, how our recruitment is catching people in the street, how Ukraine police forces attacking Moscow patriarchy, so attacking church in their eyes. And in their eyes, often we seem to be conducting the globalist agenda. And they're saying that you and Ukraine are the favorite toy of that agenda. And now that also is exacerbated by Burisma case and Hunter Biden, who was profiteering from that. And they have basically some proof how Biden family was making money on Afghanistan, how Burisma used to be a cash cow. And that's what they're putting together in one bucket and saying, look, that case of Ukraine is easier, makes it easier for Biden and his globalist fellows to steal more money. And this is how it looks for their electorate, for the working America. We very often are seen as some Satanists who are in favor of all that LGBT stuff, who are helping Biden administration to launder their money. And they're saying we're not giving money for that. We will not be paying for these bills. And we in Ukraine also are not on the best game with that. Right, I personally, with some friends on the church channels, we brought 3 times very authoritative Republicans. I was still the advisor to the office of the president. We 3 times agreed that they'll be received at the office of the president. In the spring and summer of the 22, I brought them, and they flew across the ocean. They're rather elderly, who've been in the politics since mid-80s, and for 3 times they were refused. So at the end, they said, "Are you guys mad? We're not children for you to come to pre-agreed meetings and then be shushed away." So now Ukraine figured it out. Now they have a delegation of veterans, bloggers, congressmen flying to US, buying congressmen, trying to lobby, trying to meet Republicans. And they're getting an answer, it's too late. You guys have missed the train. There are still some opportunities, that's what I'm doing here, but we've made a lot of colossal mistakes, especially the current administration of Zelensky, because that misunderstanding of American politics, listening to the wrong advisors, not knowing how to balance things, toying too much with Biden administration without understanding that there is a right turn in the world, both in Europe and in the United States as well. So inability to predict that and foresee that, even though some people were trying to speak very loud, to speak up on that, providing additional opportunities to meet, to establish these contacts. This is one of the colossal strategic mistakes that we have, which we are trying to patch with some tools now. So this is a big loss for us. And Republicans, especially Trumpists, they are not negative in relation to Ukraine. They are negative in relation to Ukraine as the democratic project of Biden. They will not fund that. But they hate Putin. They really don't like Putin, especially Trump also, because he was initially portrayed as Putin's spy or Putin's pal. So they're saying that they will not let him reign, but they are not going to support globalist projects which have a ton of money being siphoned through. So this is the situation in the United States. But if you make a bigger step back, you can see that they are in a very difficult situation as the country. They basically have a cold civil war going on there, ideological war. Globalists have suffered utter defeats in Afghanistan, and they only know how to make money on these things, but they don't know how to achieve things. Republicans are trying to break these global structures, and that's why I'm saying that Europe is probably a better ally for the moment, because United States will likely be engulfed in their turmoil at the moment. Thank you very much, Alexey. It was very good to see you here. We're very thankful to him and thankful to you, dear viewers. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. Thank you so much.